In 480 BC, Athens, one of the most important cities of ancient Greece, was sacked by the Persian army. At the time, no Greek could have imagined that only a century later they would recover their strength, defeat the Persians' vast armies, and establish a Greek state across the Mediterranean in Egypt that would rule for more than 3 centuries. It was only during the reign of King Philip II of Macedonia that the Greeks were strong enough to stand up to the Persians. Philip II, born in 382 BC, took over the kingdom of Macedonia from his father and made it stronger militarily, politically, and economically. As a result of his successive campaigns, he succeeded in creating a Hellenic unity in Greece. Philip's son, Alexander, was born in 356 BC, at a time when the kingdom of Macedonia, ruled by his father, was growing in size and strength. As a child, Alexander grew up with his friend Ptolemy, who would later become Pharaoh of Egypt. Ptolemy, presumably the son of Lagus, a Macedonian nobleman, had the good fortune to study philosophy, science, mathematics, and politics with Aristotle, as well as physical training such as military training, martial arts, horseback riding, and hunting. Alexander ascended to the throne of Macedonia at the age of 20, following the death of his father, Philip II, in 336 BC. Ptolemy, who had been by Alexander's side since childhood, was chosen as one of his 7 personal bodyguards, called somatophylakes in Greek, after Alexander's accession to the throne. The fact that he was chosen for such an important position was an indication of how much Alexander trusted him. From the moment he ascended the throne at a young age, Alexander's sole aim was to embark on a great campaign of conquest in the East. However, soon after he ascended the throne, some Greek city-states rebelled against Alexander, seeking to take advantage of his inexperience as a young man. Alexander decided to lead his army himself and go to southern Greece to show his superiority to the people and make them accept him. His advisors warned him not to undertake a military campaign, but instead to resolve the conflict through diplomatic means. However, Alexander ignored these warnings, gathered his military strength, and began his advance with an army of 3,000 men. He defeated the rebel armies one by one and gained control over the Greek city-states. Returning triumphantly to Macedonia from his journey to the south, Alexander now had no obstacles left in front of him to start the great conquest movement he had dreamed of. Alexander, who completed his preparations in the spring of 334 BC with an army of 40,000 people, began his great campaign. He crossed the Dardanelles into Asia and met the Persian satrapal army at the Granicus River. Alexander immediately put his army in battle formation. He managed to win a great victory over the Persian army by applying a skewed battle formation. With this victory, the dominance of the Persian state in Asia Minor was destroyed, and the Macedonian army paved the way. After this victory, Alexander followed the coastline and captured coastal cities such as Sardis, Miletus, and Halicarnassus. After completely conquering Lycia, he headed inland and captured Lydia and Phrygia. He then turned south and came to the Cilician coast. As the Macedonian army was about to cross the Nur Mountains and head towards Syria, Alexander received the news that the Persian king Darius was approaching the Macedonian army from the north. He immediately ordered his army into battle formation and met Darius's troops. In this battle, called the Battle of Issos, he succeeded in defeating the Persian army, which was twice the number of the Macedonian army. After the great victory, he followed the coastline with his army and captured the cities one by one. In the fall of 332 BC, Alexander, with the Macedonian army under his command, arrived in front of the city of Pelusium in the northeast of the Nile Delta to conquer Egypt, his next target. Mazakes, the Persian satrap of Egypt, who had heard in advance of the Persian army's great defeat at the hands of the Macedonian army, was aware that he did not have the power to defeat Alexander. Therefore, he surrendered all of Egypt to Alexander without any resistance. Thus, the Egyptian satrapy was annexed to Macedonia. After conquering Egypt, Alexander traveled to the capital Memphis, where he offered sacrifices to the Egyptian god Apis and other gods. He won the hearts of the Egyptians with this gesture because, unlike the Persians, Alexander tolerated the Egyptians in the field of religion and made offerings to their gods. Alexander was welcomed as a savior by the Egyptian people and proclaimed Pharaoh of Egypt by the Egyptian priests. In this way, he was able to make Egypt a part of his empire without facing any rebellion. However, he preserved the local administrative structures and Egypt's traditional systems of governance. He thought that this would make it easier for Egyptians to accept foreign rule. In the same year, on Alexander's orders, construction began in the Nile Delta on the city of Alexandria, which would later become the intellectual and cultural center of the region, combining Greek culture and Egyptian traditions. After conquering Egypt, Alexander marched northward with his army to deal the final blow to the Achaemenid Empire. In October 331 BC, he defeated the Persian army for the third and last time at the Battle of Gaugamela, near the Tigris River. After the battle, the entire territory of the Achaemenid Empire was captured. Alexander had now eliminated the Achaemenid Empire and was the new ruler of the known world. Alexander did not enjoy his immense power for long. He died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BC. Alexander had no son to succeed him, so it was not clear who would inherit the throne of the Macedonian Empire. A council was held in Babylon among the leading generals of Macedonia to discuss who should inherit the empire. According to the decision taken at the council, if Alexander's pregnant Persian wife, Roxana, gave birth to a male child, he would rule. In the meantime, Perdiccas, one of Alexander's generals, was given the right to rule the empire as regent. In addition, various satrapies of the empire were given to important generals of Alexander. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's friends and generals, was given the satrapy of Egypt. Ptolemy had been chosen as one of Alexander's 7 personal bodyguards after his accession to the throne, and had served successfully as one of Alexander's commanders in the campaign against Persia. Being one of the closest men to Alexander, he was awarded the important position of satrapy of Egypt after his death. At the council in Babylon, it was decided that Alexander's funeral would be carried out according to his will. However, Perdiccas broke the plan and wanted to bury Alexander in Macedonia. By doing this, Perdiccas wanted to gain a claim to rule the entire Macedonian Empire. Burying Alexander's body in Macedonia would strengthen his hand in taking over Alexander's empire. Ptolemy was aware that if this happened, Perdiccas would be able to claim the throne of the Macedonian Empire ahead of the other generals. He did not want to be a spectator to this situation. Therefore, when Alexander's hearse was ready, he took action and convinced Arrhidaeus, who was responsible for the transportation of the hearse, to smuggle Alexander's body to Egypt and bury Alexander's body in the capital Memphis. For each of the generals who wanted to establish absolute rule in the Macedonian Empire, Alexander's body was a potential political weapon. It was therefore very important for Ptolemy to have Alexander's tomb in Egypt. This would legitimize his rule. However, unlike Perdiccas, he was not interested in the throne of the Macedonian Empire, which Alexander's most powerful generals aspired to, but instead wanted to establish a smaller but well-established kingdom in Egypt. Accordingly, Ptolemy's first act after arriving in Egypt was to kill Cleomenes, whom Perdiccas had appointed as the deputy satrap of Egypt. With all these actions, Ptolemy had earned the enmity of Perdiccas. Therefore, it was only a matter of time before Perdiccas made a move against him. Aware of the situation, Ptolemy formed an alliance with Antipatros, one of the generals of the Macedonian Empire, against Perdiccas. However, this alliance was not enough to counter Perdiccas. Ptolemy thought that he needed to have a bigger army in order to maintain his dominance in Egypt. To this end, he began to recruit mercenaries in Egypt, even though Alexander had previously forbidden satraps to have their own mercenaries. In 321 BC, Perdiccas decided to go on a campaign against Ptolemy. He left Babylon with his army, which included generals such as Pithon, Antigenes, and Seleucus as officers. Advancing through Syria and Palestine, he arrived in front of the city of Pelusium in the northeast of Egypt. Ptolemy, who had already heard that Perdiccas was going on a campaign against him, had deployed his army west of Pelusium and the Nile. Perdiccas, seeing Ptolemy's army in front of him, started to move towards the south in order to find a suitable place to cross the Nile. Ptolemy, on the other hand, followed him from the west bank of the river to prevent Perdiccas from crossing to the west of the river. After advancing for some time, Perdiccas finally found a shallow place to cross the river. But to get his army safely across, he had to capture the small fortress built across the ford, Camel's Rampart. Perdiccas ordered his army to attack the fortress, but his soldiers were unable to breach its defenses. After a while, Ptolemy came to the aid of the garrison forces with his army and managed to push Perdiccas' army back. Perdiccas' army suffered significant losses. However, these losses were not so great that Perdiccas was forced to retreat and cancel the campaign. Perdiccas believed that if he could somehow cross to the west bank of the river, he could defeat Ptolemy. He continued his southern advance in the hope of finding a new point of crossing. After a while, he found a crossing point with an islet in the center of the Nile. Before leading his troops across, he placed his elephants on the south side of the river to reduce the intensity of the waves and ordered his troops to cross. However, sometime after the armies began to cross, the elephants began to sink into the mud. Thus, the water level of the river began to rise rapidly. This was a disaster for Perdiccas' troops. Perdiccas stopped his troops from crossing the river to prevent them from drowning before they had even started to cross the river. He then ordered his soldiers, who had managed to set foot on the island in the center of the river, to cross back to the east bank. But the waters of the river were now much rougher. The majority of the soldiers drowned as they tried to cross to the east bank. Thus, Perdiccas lost a significant number of his soldiers before he even reached the west bank of the Nile. The soldiers were furious with Perdiccas that their comrades in arms had died for nothing. The army had suffered heavy losses before it had even fought a major battle, and there was little hope for the future of the campaign among the soldiers. After the heavy losses, Perdiccas' allies Pithon, Antigenes, and Seleucus agreed with the soldiers. According to them, the campaign had been a failure, and Perdiccas had shown that he did not deserve to be regent of the Macedonian throne. Aware of the grumblings among the soldiers, these three generals entered Perdiccas' tent, killed him, canceled the expedition, and left Egypt with the soldiers. Thus, Ptolemy, who no longer had any obstacle in his way to establish an independent state in Egypt, achieved his goal and succeeded in establishing the Hellenistic Ptolemy kingdom, which would rule in Egypt for centuries.